Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday. Happy Labor Day weekend. And so we're gathering this afternoon to consider the title, Work and Worship. I assumed from that these two, the sort of the idea, the implicit idea that's not being stated is that the two somehow go together, or they can go together ideally. And those of us who dwell in the realm of appearances, we tend to separate those two. So I think that's sort of what we're getting after, is how can that be? How can we combine them? Why is it we separate them? Of course, in the metaphysics of the Bhagavad Gita, especially in the third discourse, work and worship are presented as identical. But we have to have meetings like this because the worldly mind bifurcates these things. It would seem that separative egotism has a lot to gain by driving these ideas apart. So to enunciate sort of the oversimplified caricature, worship is sequestered to sectarian houses of worship on the weekend, and work is the struggle for survival the rest of the time. Work is the way we take a role in the sort of impersonal juggernaut of the economy. It is viewed often as an unwilling role, accepted as an act of resignation. One resigns other plans, other fulfilling things that one would rather be doing. It is a great sacrifice to the personal ego, accepting for a moment the very low connotation of that term sacrifice, meaning deprivation and loss. But we'll a little later address the Gita's notion of how elevated sacrifice or yajna is. And for that worldly sacrifice, one receives, of course, compensation, as we call it, that is wages, maybe even benefits, maybe even an annual paid vacation, even in the US, maybe a week or two. Well, Henry David Thoreau wrote to a young man he knew in Concord he wrote about these young men that he knew in Concord who got stuck working in banks. And he said, "Do men know nothing? I know many men who in common things are not to be deceived, who trust no moonshine, who count their money correctly, and who know how to invest it, who are said to be prudent and knowing, who yet will stand at a desk the greater part of their lives as cashiers in banks, and glimmer and rust and finally go out there. If they know anything, what under the sun do they do that for? Do they know what bread is or what it is for? Do they know what life is? If they knew something, the places which know them now would know them no more forever." So Thoreau had a lot to say. Those of you who read Thoreau, who know Walden or know his letters to Harrison Blake about bringing together vocation and avocation, know that he was pretty relentless about the subject. Addressing his friend's preoccupation with uniting vocation and avocation, Thoreau said he believed that the bread which feeds the body and the bread of life could be brought together. Thoreau points mysteriously to a deeper understanding of the whole concept of earning one's bread. He wrote, "They who seek honestly and sincerely, with all their hearts and lives and strength, to earn their bread, do earn it. And it is sure to be very sweet to them. A very little bread, a very few crumbs are enough, if it be the right quality, for it is infinitely nutritious. Let each man then earn at least a crumb of bread for his body before he dies, and know the taste of it, that it is identical with the bread of life, and that they both go down at one swallow." So that's kind of the elevated view to me when we talk about uniting love and need, or work and avocation. We're talking broadly about worship and work. But the most memorable lines for me regarding this have come from the American poet Robert Frost. And I will endeavor to show you the screen here of this as I read this. Let's see. Okay, you should see it. My favorite lines from Two Tramps in Mud Time. But yield who will to their separation. My object in living is to unite my avocation and my vocation, as my two eyes make one in sight. Only where love and need are one, and work is play for mortal stakes, is the deed ever really done for heaven and for future's sakes. So yeah, years ago, those lines just riveted me. I can't say I've been successful necessarily in bringing the two together, but let's talk about the concept here first. I think a clue to the integration can be taken from the literal meaning of the word worship, having to do with rendering respect or tribute to the worthy. Worship and worthy are from the same root. Well, who are the worthy? Or what is really worth to you? All of this gets bound up in the realm of appearances, doesn't it? We inherit patriotic and sectarian religious traditions that come with rites and rituals and formalities. If we recite the right formulations and perform the right actions, we are supposedly engaged in worship. But isn't there a deeper meaning that is lost in this? Can we really tap our deepest conviction based on what elders and patriots and religious authorities say is worthy? Is the perception of worth or value really something that can be taken secondhand? Of course, our elders might be right, and we may mature to appreciate or to awaken depths of love for country and heroes and gods and sages. The point is not so much to condemn formalities. The point is that only a direct perception of value can release what we may truly designate worship. It is heart energy. It silences one's being. It draws one to a point. It becomes a talisman for sloughing off shallow values that we have become attached to, much to our detriment. The process of sifting and sorting value is connected to, of course, what psychology calls individuation. Individuation is the loosening of social conformity and neutralizing of social conditioning, not to merely react and then appear as a radical or a bohemian. After all, reaction betrays attachment to the same appearances. Reaction and conformity are equally enmeshed. What is needed is a living vertical infusion, a noetic intervention, which may seem to come from without, but is actually an impulse from within one's very center. So you might be thinking about now, well, fine, Joe. I know what I value. I know what I love, but I have to pay the rent. And you will be expecting to hear from me about now the platitude, well, learn to love what you do until you can do what you love. Or to hijack a phrase from the free love revolution of the 60s, if you can't be with the job you love the job you're with. Who has not been haunted by a fear of that infidelity, career infidelity, the feeling that one is wasting one's life, burying one's talents, merely to sell one's hours to the economy? It is the worst form of prostitution, the most demeaning. But is it true? Or is this fear really a kind of phantom projection of our separative egotism? In the Hindu conception of the universe, of course, the universe is ruled by impersonal law, in both grand scale and in minute particular. There is an order or justice that conditions not only objects and events, but also thoughts and feelings. Every human being occupies a unique address in a vast web of interdependence. Every human soul is the incarnation of evolving divinity in a precise ontological location where he or she can have the greatest exercise, render the best service, and harvest the most valuable learning. In that sense, wise teachers have always said that the duty before one, is supremely important. The petulant personal ego wants to dismiss the pointless demands, the annoying people that are holding one back. But wisdom has always taught that we ourselves are holding ourselves back. And the only way to unlock the portal in front of us is to embrace the exact circumstances before us. We have to see that our complaints and dismissals only cloud our vision. Maybe there is some truth to the platitude about learning to love what you are doing until you can do what you love. Or maybe, to alter it a bit, it is more a matter of bringing love into whatever we are doing until the love is the only thing that counts. And you clearly see that the form is a secondary consideration. No form can bar you from being who you truly are. The Hindu Song of God, the Bhagavad Gita, of course, the great treatise on the inner yoga, teaches that it is better to do one's own duty than the duty of another. And that, quote, other doesn't have to necessarily be seen as a person outside us. It can also be seen as a misrepresentation of ourselves. The duty of another is full of danger. Your own duty, your sva-dharma, is the only key to your release from confusion and unhappiness. Of course, the great discourse on this is the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And the underlying conception is this notion of freedom from action. And of course, action and karma are the same thing when we're speaking about the Gita. Where we are out of harmony with the hum of the universe, we suffer impairment. Just as your car might choke and limp its way up the Cuesta grade if the ignition timing is off. But more, the world is made up of a vast web of conditioning, everything leading to something else, with no end of the rope to be found anywhere. And falling into avidya or ignorance, the human soul loses its spiritual vista. It falls into an identification with something small and fleeting. Now, the teacher of this discourse, Krishna, is instructing Arjuna to see himself as in the game, but not of the game. And he says that freedom cannot be found simply by refusing to act or just renouncing everything. These extreme attitudes of asceticism among the Hindus at the time were based on error, Krishna taught. Mere repression of the organs of action does nothing if the imagination is all caught up. But to engage the organs of action in a fitting way without attachment, Krishna says, is excellence. The world is bound by works, except for acts done in the spirit of sacrifice, the Gita says. That is, as an offering, generously, without conditionality. One must advance to an elevated relationship to the universe, which is non-contractual. To take one's place in the great dance, and to ultimately learn that what dances within you is not you, but is the spirit of yajna itself. The separate self does not exist. It is a fictitious identity. The way that it attempts to appropriate resources and leverage actions in its own favor, is a fool's errand. This separative ego imagines that it is some sort of cul-de-sac from the highway of being, but the universe knows only thoroughfares, and that is the nature of all action rightly perceived. So at the core of this third chapter, Krishna makes reference to the myth of Prajapati. Now, Prajapati was the creator of the world. He didn't just create physical animal man, but he fused this creature with the spirit of sacrifice. Quote, may this be to you, that is sacrifice, the spirit of sacrifice, may this be to you the cow of plenty, yielding all your wishes. And of course, in Indian thought and culture, the emblem of the cow is a symbol of wealth and maternal generosity. By yajna, by sacrifice, nourish the gods, that the gods may nourish you. But learn to be nourished, Krishna warns, by the remnants of sacrifice. It will always be enough. Who are the sinful in this view? The sinful are those who, quote, prepare food for themselves alone. That is, they who are blind to the web of interdependence, out of which they emerge, from which they are never separate, and toward which they owe their being. To work in an abstract cosmic sense is to pay that debt, not merely to a particular economy that you participate in, but to the cosmic economy behind it. Do you wish to attain freedom from action? Well, Krishna says, learn what action is first. He traces in that third chapter the great yajna chakra, the great wheel of sacrifice. All creatures are born from food. All food is nourished by rain. All rain comes from sacrifice. All sacrifice comes from action. But all sacrificial action is in fact performed by the divine spirit and by none else. It is forever established as the basis of the cosmos. It's not going anywhere. So we ought to gain acquaintance with it and establish our views and our own actions on that basis. In short, the whole creation issues from sacrifice, and sacrifice issues from creation. Sacrifice is that great diffusing influence that fertilizes the whole cosmos, making it inhabitable, making it viable. And our own actions can participate in that life-giving energy. Now, the Gita seems to suggest we can learn to see the wheels of action we are experiencing objectively. We can see that they have a logic and a rhythm of their own. It would be like watching the seasons of the year from an unmoved center. Which season are you? Well, you are none of them. You witness them all. It's like a music director conducting a great symphony of Beethoven. He will experience all the movements, their logic, their inception, their ripening, the decay of motifs, the passing on to others. But the conductor is at the center. He embraces each moment with supreme mindfulness. Yet he must be someone apart. He is the music while the music lasts, to quote Eliot, yet he remains when the music ceases. The divinity, who is our true self, according to the Hindu doctrine, is in the center of all of this and has nothing to gain and nothing to lose by it. At the end of the Gita, in the 18th chapter, are those great lines, "The Lord of all beings dwelleth in the heart, O Arjuna. causing all creatures to revolve as if mounted on a wheel by the power of Maya. Seek refuge in him alone with thy whole being, O son of Bharata. By his grace, thou shalt obtain supreme peace, the eternal abode. So I think that this notion of discovering this true center, this unmoving center within all activity and within ourselves is kind of a key to bringing work and worship together as I see it. Because it's only from that standpoint that we can develop the detachment to be in the world but not of the world. I want to close before we have our discussion with these wonderful lines from T.S. Eliot.
No, okay.
Let me see. Oh,
Buddy?
let me give you that. Here's one last slide here. And at the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor toward, at the still point, there the dance is. But neither a rest nor movement, and do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered. Neither movement from nor toward, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point. There would be no dance, and there is only the dance. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I think you'll have to unmute anybody who would like to ask a question or make a comment or speak. Just unmute yourself.
Would you clarify more what you think the concept or reality of worship is in relation to what you said about finding the still center point? We do with that word.
Yeah, so what would clarify the notion of worship with respect to this notion of finding the still center? Well, I think that worship is, of course, connected with love. Worship is our recognition of worth, and it's something that goes beyond. It's a form of grace, I think, in the sense that it goes beyond our will and our own sense of personal agency. True worship, I think, chooses us as much as we are choosing our objects of worship. And we know it's present because we know the effect it has on us. And I think in that sense, true worship is a form of energy. And the whole point is how do we infuse that energy into our work, into our hands and feet and, and speech that we associate with our action in the world. We know, all of us have experienced moments of levity and elevation when something is really in sync, and somehow our ideals and our affections and our action all are merged in one. And there's this terrific flow to it. There are psychologists now who study this flow state and try to find the truth about it. But for me, I think it has something to do with that. And we know that when we're in an elevated state like that, we also find ourselves supremely forgiving, in the sense that we don't get hung up on the little things and the little setbacks, even bigger things and bigger setbacks. We are in some kind of zone of being. As the Gita says, the practitioner of Krishna's yoga takes refuge in the self within. So he isn't caught up, he or she is not caught up in the movement around one.
I have a question. One can appreciate the notion that there's a sense in which one can consecrate the activity of work and thinking here of one's profession, for example, as a simple form of dharma. But what are we to do if our circumstances are such that the only kind of job we can get is one in which we find it morally objectionable? But we really have no choice in the sense that we have a family to support. There's no other options for us. And so we find ourselves in a situation in which we're working for like an arms dealer or something of that sort. So is it still possible in a situation in which you find yourself, quote, working, or your profession is such that it has elements in it that seem to be going against the very moral value of the work? In other words, how can we bring worship together with this kind of work?
Thank you, Jim, for offering a supremely challenging question. I'm glad at the end you said where we find there may be elements in what we're doing that are morally objectionable. Maybe it's not an all or nothing thing. Maybe it's not, whether to work in a nonprofit or to work for an arms dealer. Probably we can all relate to that last notion that it's a mixed bag a lot of the times. I mean, I'm the owner of a drapery business, but yeah, I mean, I know that not all of our uses of materials is green. There's all kinds of fuzzy areas in that, but the point is, what happens to a person who's in that condition, to take your example, that seems to, I guess one could question, we have a perception sometimes that we don't have a choice. Maybe there's an option we haven't considered. I mean, there are some very idealistic people.
I want to make it a hypothetically exacting question.
Yeah.
Because there are times when, I mean, I think the Buddha someone was a butcher, and the comment was made by the Buddha, yes, but he was the most remarkable being that we saw all day.
Yeah.
How is that? What is meant by that?
Right. Well, there must be a way to consecrate what is before one in a way that uses it in whatever way one can in an elevated way. I mean, even if one is an international arms dealer, one is still dealing with human beings. The other dealers, they still are spiritual beings with aspirations, and they're still human beings struggling with relationships and struggling for meaning. One could be an elevating influence even in those circumstances. And perhaps one can even be a subtle reformer while one is in that. I guess maybe the point is the keys are always in one's hands, in one's inner being, and there's always some way to view it, some way to frame it that one can use it the best one can, I would assume. Do you have another thought on that, Jim?
Well, no, I have a follow-up kind of question. Are you suggesting that that our fundamental attitude, say, consecrating or trying to bring something of the finest element in oneself and in human beings, if you bring it to a job that has objectionable elements in it, does that in a sense accelerate the possibility of in fact doing what you're saying, in a sense reforming in a subtle way the job that you're taking on, which seems to be so objectionable in one sense, but it's still one's dharma. There's still a point to it. Someone else has to do it. Why not you? Why not you do something with it as best you can? And that might do a great deal for it in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And don't forget too that what are we participating in at any given moment? I mean, there is one's official job and role, but one is also participating at many levels. One is participating with the invisible elements. One is in multiple layers of community. one can keep a mobile perspective of roles and identities and not be so caught up, in that, I'm an arms trader, and I really like your suggestion that the best reforms, the truest reforms, come from within without. They're not reactionary, and that one could be, even if one doesn't see it in one's own lifetime, one can be slowly participating with a reform that has to happen. Kind of sort of a bodhisattvic.
Got Monica has a question.
Please.
You'll have to unmute yourself, Monica.
So sorry. Thank you. This was great, Joe. Thank you very much, this presentation, but I have a certain kind of confusion. You talked about, you say to work is to pay a debt to economy and also the economy of the universe. And I'm thinking about the artistic creative person or the entrepreneur, such as yourself, who soars, the type of individual or the type of person who soars through doing what they love. It almost doesn't matter what the profession is. And so the common thing or feedback or thing that people who are in these particular kinds of work, the kind of thing they say is, I was outside of myself, and yet at the same time, I'm wondering, how is it that you can do the work as acting as the self of all and be detached from love and loving what you do, which to some degree has to require some personal investment, and of course there's that common saying, do what you love. So I'm trying to find where the center is, where a person can be at their zenith and at the same time be on this path of light that tells us somehow that we're to go beyond the pairs of opposites.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Monica, for that question. That's a huge question, and it was interesting for me to, I've been reading or listening mostly to a biography of Emerson, and it was so interesting to hear how much Emerson struggled with the whole question of what should he be doing, and is he doing what he loves, and how will he fit in? Should he remain a Unitarian minister? How much he was tortured by watching the years go by, and he advanced in his 30s, and he felt like he was being eaten up by minutia of other considerations. And then these letters between Thoreau and Harrison Blake, they're all addressing this issue as well. And the early parts of Walden in the economy, they also do. So it's a perennial issue. And I don't know the answer to this. I know I'm probably like many of you. I've struggled with this whole question myself, and I wonder how much, I guess maybe faith in karma helps me a little bit, but I wonder, gosh, how much are we held back by not having a job that we really love? Maybe another way to look at it is, how do we pay the debt to love? Maybe those of us who don't have work that we really love, we have to find creative ways to use the margins of life. Somebody else would call that, might call that resignation or selling out. I'm certainly tortured by that idea sometimes. Is it selling out? I do feel I have to have pursuits on the margins of my life that really nourish my soul, whether it be music or drama or other things, or even doing, taking part in theosophical discussions. And I also find that in some ways too, I become a little bit suspect if I were to take on a job that where I'm no longer an amateur, and don't forget the word amateur means to love something. If suddenly if it got connected with money, you know, and having to find a way to market it and keep the flow going and all of that, well, there are plenty of stories of that happening to writers and musicians where it really destroys the thing for them. So it's really interesting to think of it in that regard for me. And I've found, like I said, in trusting karma, I kind of fell into, after college, fell into the drapery industry. It's been 37 years now. I've tried several times to climb out of the pit and the walls are really slick. I just always fall right back in. So, you know, and yet I get these moments where I see, where I have this some kind of supreme reassurance. I can never plan when it'll come, but suddenly I'll see, you know, this is fairly appropriate for me to be doing this. You know, this helps me preserve a kind of balance in life. You know, this helps me develop a kind of appetite to go back towards my avocations in a way. You know, this helps me, you know, in communicating with people. You know, it's a great job for communicating with people, for seeing how people live, for going into their homes. And I'll tell you, there have been many times where I've left a drapery appointment and I realized the least important thing of whatever just happened for the last hour was draperies. It was, you know, somebody had lost their son and they had no one to talk to but me, you know, that kind of thing. So.
Oh,
Thank you.
Robert Moore was next.
I think Anthony had his hand up for quite a while, right?
Yes, thank you. Wonderful presentation. I was just wondering, could it possibly be that any work that we do, whether it's welcome or unwelcome or objectionable to our criterion or sensibilities, could it all be seen as a surrender to our dharma, to care for whomever we're caring for? Is that a part of the worship that you're talking about, or could it be seen in that light?
No, thank you, Anthony. That's a great suggestion. I think that's to me, that seems to be the path to peace, what you're saying. And in a way, I think it can be helped by a kind of intellectual vision of the cosmos as a vast field of interdependence, or as karma as a kind of a justice that assigns each to us an address in that larger interdependent network that most facilitates our learning and growth. And if we really trusted that, then in a sense, each of us is in the center all the time of where we need to be. And I think that assurance then could be ours, and we could come back to that assurance to renew our feelings and renew our vision again and again and again. But it is a kind of surrender. It's certainly not an inertness. It's not a surrender or resignation in the sense of folding up in depression. But it is a surrendering of that part of us that wants to, fight against it and endlessly question in the lowest sense, generating grievances and resistances about it all. Because I think that's what I get from the teaching is, or what I've found in my own life is, if I could really surrender or accept what is directly before me right now, it does happen to be the next step in a series of stones across the creek, so to speak. And it comes from me, thinking about, oh, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? Way out there that makes me trip on what's directly before me, because I'm all caught up in what ifs and what have you. So
We've got a lot of people that figured out how to put their hands up. Kurt, you were noticing these things, Robert's got his hand up too. Look at all you guys with your hands up.
Robert's had his hand up the longest.
Okay.
So, I think he's next.
Joe, you remember Raghav and I often talked about role precision, role flexibility, and role transcendence. And that seems applicable in every context of life, actually, not, just employment. So I was thinking of that in relation to any task, anything that karma brings. But my question has to do with how is it what we do nurtures the gods?
What's the question again?
How is it that what we do can nurture the gods?
Oh,
Yeah. Thank you, Robert, for that question, and also that really helpful formula. Was it role precision, role flexibility, and role transcendence? And yeah, I mean, the opposite of that is to get fixated or locked into some small, narrowed conception of oneself, one's own prison house. Even just to think through those concepts seems to open something up. How do we nourish? The Gita says, nourish the gods. Well, it says with this spirit, with this gift of worship, and I imagine the Gita is referring to probably the whole teachings from the Hindu scriptures and tradition about various sacrifices and rites and rituals and all of that. But of course, Krishna is bringing it to something internal as well. Prajapati says he creates a material man and he infuses with man the sacrificial spirit. And he says, with this spirit, then, with this dimension of your life, which is worship, nourish the gods that the gods may nourish you. And I suppose right after that, he gives the picture of the whole yagna chakra, the whole wheel of sacrifice, the interdependence of, beings are composed of food comes about from rain comes from sacrifice comes from action comes from Brahman, from the spirit of sacrifice. And so I suppose we nourish the God. One way is to broaden our intellectual view, our inner view of this interdependence, to get past our narrow egotism and to see how things are interdependent, how we are participating in this economy. And then to expand that view in an impersonal way, as the teachings of Theosophy do, by realizing, well, we subsist in a universe that is not at all limited to what our eyes and ears and touch display. That's a very narrow, tiny phenomenon of a vast noumenon. And to therefore let our intellectual side take stretch, in that dimension of inner forces, inner beings, elemental kingdoms. We're participating in all of that. And as we do that gratefully, as we allow our own emanations to, like I said, in a non-contractual way, in a non-conditional way, to be generous with the universe, with our thoughts and feelings and our actions, perhaps we will find that we are supported in turn in ways. There's a reciprocity there.
You've been paying attention. Who's next?
Well, I was.
Maybe I am.
Judy, why don't you go ahead, please?
Okay, well, I'll be brief. I apologize for being late, computer problems, but Joe, I liked what I heard, and I just wanted to comment that years ago I had a lecture series at Cal Poly that was very successful, work, play, and worship. And as chair, I invited Professor Raghavan Iyer to come up and talk. And I think he was in the worship section, and he said, why should these three be separate? I mean, he just, of course, mesmerized the students and the faculty. And, indeed, Krishna is at play in the universe, and the universe is Vishnu's dream. So play should be included. I know in some of my better days teaching, I was able to tell jokes and kind of play with the students. And that was a wonderful time. But I, agree that work should be right livelihood according to Buddhism. Some people don't know any better. And I think Ragavan would say, well, if you're making wine, try to get a better job if you can. So I wondered if you would comment on play and that idea of maybe a better job or a better livelihood.
Well, no, I love that. I'm glad you filled out the triad with that concept of play. I bet maybe somebody else has something they might say about that.
Well, along with that, I was just going to mention, as many of you probably know, that Thoreau considered teaching to be the highest civic calling, and also what he was fitted to do, and part of his dharma, you could say, in his life. But he tried his hand at it several times. The second time, after his own schooling, seemed very promising, but he quit after the first 10 days because he was forced to flog students for misbehaving, and he simply wouldn't refuse to do it. Or I think he did it once and then realized he couldn't continue. And it also, in the context of secular monasticism, which we heard a talk on last week, and also thinking in terms of Thoreau's example and also Gandhi, it does seem like one of the ways in which the secular monastic transforms society is by bringing a higher ethical standard to the performance of dharma in their job, in their search for livelihood, their search for a means to house and feed themselves and their families. So there's that obviously is a sacred dharma, you could say, that adults have as family members, or even if they're single. But also the challenge then becomes, because we have such an emphasis in our society upon labor itself, right? And how important it is to keep this economy rolling and increasing the number of jobs. So it doesn't matter if those jobs happen to be violating fundamental ethical standards, like the enormous pharmaceutical industry seems to be doing in a lot of ways. The military industrial complex, big parts of the livestock industry, where people are at these jobs that are, that Gandhi would certainly say they are violating basic ethical standards, and so that they really should be looking for something else to do, find another way. And often there is another way. So I'm just, as part of the conversation, I just want to say that seems like, and Jim brought it up initially, it's a very difficult question, of course, if you're caught in a specific job where you feel like there are ethics being challenged. Do you continue in that job? Do you find another way? Do you find a way to participate in that job without violating those ethics? All of those are critical questions for the spiritual life, would seem.
You just remind me of that true story, that wonderful story of the woman who was born, I think she was autistic. And she grew up and she ended up getting a PhD degree in agriculture or something of that sort. But what she did was she...
Temple Grande.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, yes. There's a movie about her.
So she ended up figuring out a way that the animals that were going to be slaughtered, the cows, it was done in a humane way. And that was not easy to do. She had a lot of resistance, but she showed them how much better it was. And really, in a way, it was better for the animals. It was better for the people. It was better for people eating it. She didn't think that necessarily. But the point was, she took a situation and she made it better. And she helped nature by doing that.
A great example. Yeah.
Well, just one other point about Thoreau is that he ended up saying, in looking back over his attempts to participate as a teacher in as a profession, and saying that they all failed. every attempt failed. And why? Is because the element of bartering was entering into the equation. He says, as soon as you're doing something for the sake of money, you're in a kind of, you're taking the glory, the ambrosia out of it, you know. So I think that's another key element, right? Is it just not just the purification of motive, but finding a way so that you see something intrinsically good in what you are doing that has nothing to do with the payback. It's coming to, whether that's egotistic payback or monetary. Anyway, you made that point several different ways, Joe. I'm just emphasizing it.
Yeah, no, it's very.
Joe, Miluka's had her hand up politely for a long time.
Hi, hello everybody, and thank you so much. It's a lovely, lovely talk. Very provocative. I would like to say that that many things came into mind, and Joseph Campbell used to say, if you do a job for money, you have lost your bliss. So that was one thing that I want to mention. And then I remember our dear Joe Pope in New York told me something very beautiful. He said that when Henry Geiger was writing the Manas magazine, I know some of you are familiar with the magazine, he didn't know how to distribute it. And Joe said, can you help me? And Joe Pope said, I don't know anything about it, but I certainly could try. And he did. And he ended up not only distributing Henry, but other books, magazine that were related to occultism and metaphysics. And before you know, he said he built an empire and became very wealthy. And he said, my motive was to help my friend. And he never thought that he would become a publisher. So it seems like when you help karma, karma helps you back, was my point. And Mother Teresa always say, don't do great things, do little things with great love. Then my question here will be, since this is an illusion and we sometimes forget that this is an illusion and nothing is permanent except our mortals, higher self. Then how can we, if we have this power of creation and thoughts are important, and if we work with nature, and nature will help us as well, and be with balance and equilibrium, all this will attract to you the life that you're supposed to be meant to be. And so if this is an illusion and we have created this universe that we call life, can we just maybe reset and try to think about how to create something different than what we are doing, especially if we are unhappy with our lives? And also music, somebody mentioned music and arts and all that, supposed to be a way that you also find your bliss and balance in life. So how can we change this illusion? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, taking up just comment on the first portion of what you said, yes, the story of Henry Geiger and the publication, and that is, you know, I'm reminded in the Gita, as I was reviewing chapter 3, there's that the statement Krishna says that the propensities act in the propensities, and that the person who cherishes the thought I am the doer is deluded. And I think that's so interesting with respect to what you're saying, because we suffer from a false sense of agency a lot of times. We don't realize how much we're assisted in various ways, and I think you're absolutely right. Where we are in harmony with things, help seems to arrive in a spontaneous way, and it's only surprising to us because we think of ourselves as separate. If we thought of ourselves as we are, we wouldn't be surprised that that's the case. So I think that's really that's another thing we can do in this regard, is to realize that to soften the hard edges of that sense of personal agency. You know, we in the USA, we suffer from this this whole concept of the self-made man, and you know, the Marlboro man or whatever, who accepts that all of life is against him, and he'll prove his strength and domination by making his impress and defying everything and defying all the odds. And we're kind of, I think we're enamored by that because it's so appealing to our sense of separate egotism. But you know, years ago, I was just as a quick personal anecdote, I was sort of taken. I was you know, installing draperies for a living. And for 10 years, I started thinking about Whitman, and I was reading Whitman on my own, and I began to see that his poems could be staged, you know, and there could be like staged recitations, choral recitations, and you could set some of the poems to music, and they could be to movement, and you could weave a narrative of Whitman's life through this. And this took place in my imagination as I was climbing step ladders and, you know, hanging draperies and all this. And I didn't know what to do with that. All I can say is, as I revisited this theater in my head, it took on more and more life, and it surprised me. I enjoyed it supremely, but at the same time, I kept a distance from, well, you know, that's inside me, and this is the outside world out here. And lo and behold, strange thing is, I was singing with a choral group at the time, and it suddenly hit me that I should try to do this thing. And a couple of the singers I knew, I introduced them to the idea. They automatically went on board. I pitched it to the Institute of World Culture, and they said yes. And once the commitment was made, then I was like at nights burning the midnight oil writing this thing. Anyway, the whole thing is, it felt like something was just running through me. It didn't feel like I was doing it. I didn't feel like the agent, you know. And there was press about it. There was interviews in both local papers. There was the local radio station did an interview with me. It gained all this momentum, and we gained a grant to run it, and then we had big houses of people who came to see it. It was really phenomenal, but it wouldn't make any sense to say that I, you know, have some personal sense of agency in it. I really felt like I was just cooperating with something happening.
Could I mention something here, just that Joe would have been too modest to mention? Didn't you get some kind of an acting award on this whole thing?
Yeah, the production won local, what's called an indie, a local theater award. Yeah.
So that's what Joe does, you know, in between, you know, hanging drapes, he gets awards and stuff. But just taking that thing about what you said about the agency, because I think that is just so therapeutic to this whole thing. And going back to that question about role precision and flexibility and transcendence and all that. Is there anything that might apply to this to kind of working with other students of theosophy and for humanity or for the community, at least at a minimum? Humanity is a big word, but at least for the community and theosophical cooperation with others and so forth. It seems that we have a hard time with that, and we get mixed up in our egos, and I'm the this editor, or I'm the that treasurer, or I'm, you know, names and titles. I was wondering if you could apply some of that same therapy, if you will, to that kind of thing.
You know, I don't I mean, a quick comment that comes to mind, and I think it's always difficult when we take on institutional roles to, you know, there's some phrase of Jesus's in this regard that's escaping me, but you know, we will the whole letter, the letter and the spirit thing, we begin to put the letter forward. We begin to become attached to the forms as if they were the thing themselves, and then we become the ritualists, you know. And it's a constant, I think it's a constant battle. We want to have organizations. We want to be able to have meetings like this, and somebody has to do the groundwork for this, you know, and like the meeting we're having now. And we need, you know, have to deal with the dimensions of time, space, resources, hierarchy. We need people to take on positions of leadership. But the thing is, all of that can suddenly get disguised for doing theosophy, right? Suddenly we say, you know, Are you? Yes, I love theosophy. It means that I go to this meeting here and I go to this meeting there and I go to this theater and and when in fact, what is the true theosophy? The true theosophy is the invisible theosophy. It should be the life of all these things. It should be that which I shine a light on all the other things in my life, and they come to life because of this light that I'm shining. So it's that whole thing about reality and image. We're never, there's no secret sauce for that. We can always get caught in image, and we just have to become so critically aware of the trouble that we know to go within and renew and deal lightly with it. And I think if we're successful, then we will get in less ego wars with so-and-so editor of so-and-so journal and this and that. We'll be more forgiving, more easy, and probably voluntarily relinquish positions rather than hang on to them forever. Let other people step out from sunlight into shade to make more room for especially younger people.
Yeah, for sure. Just another follow-up. I think, could you say something about Gandhian trusteeship in relationship to roles?
Gandhian trusteeship in relationship to roles. Well, I think just the notion of trusteeship is hugely in line with Gita's teaching. And it's just, for Gandhi, the whole notion of private property was a form of violence. It's a false conception at root. There's nothing, none of us really have anything. So because we're caught up in a fictitious egotism, we're trying to go around appropriating things, somehow wrestling them from the universe and then having them as us. And right there's a false duality, if I'm offering something, to God, wasn't it his in the first place? I mean, was it ever mine? Well, how does one offer what doesn't belong to one anyway? So that, I think to think seriously about what Gandhi was saying about trusteeship means that we have to participate in the world of property and possession, but we can do it in a whole nother way. We can hold lightly to those things. Exactly. And we can really ask ourselves about various possessions and roles that we play. Why do I occupy this? Do I occupy this for ego gratification? Do I do I possess this for convenience and personal gratification? Could I see it, without feeling guilty? Could I see it in another way? Can I see it as it enhances the whole? Maybe I can sort and sift things that I have and things that I do in terms of what is necessary from that standpoint.
Thank you. Well, are there any other questions or clarifications that people would like to bring up?
I have a question for Joe about manual labor. Gandhi and Vinoba Bhave put some merit on the idea of working, doing manual labor, earning one's bread. Don't eat if you haven't worked, that kind of idea. And another aspect, I think, to this idea of manual labor is being appreciative of those many people around the world who work so hard through manual labor to keep everybody else going. So it could be part of just being in sympathy with, as a reminder. It could also be part of being close to nature once in a while by holding onto something or working with what nature produces. And then the other part is working with hands and the imagination that can come about with people who do what they're talking about in India now, that if they're involved in the sacred economy, where they define it as all these people who are artists or tradespeople who use their hands quite a bit, but also other faculties. So do you have any thoughts about manual labor? And also, is there anything in the Gita that suggests why that to do some is to, kind of honor something fundamental in life?
Oh, wow, Jenny, thank you. What a great comment, and what a great thing for us to think about on Labor Day. And that sheds light on that on that question Robert asked about the reciprocity with the gods. I mean, just any of you right now, just pause and look around you and look at all the material things that people have made and then people have transported to you, or you've got somewhere. I mean, there's a vast amount of manual production that's kind of hidden from us behind the curtain, you know, the curtain parts, and out comes, you know, a chair, out comes a carton of milk, or whatever. And so we our own limited imagination doesn't take that into account, but we could train ourselves to begin at least to pause and think about that a little bit more, because that's the reality of it, is there's this vast you know, each of us is a physical being, and we're dependent on so many physical things for food, clothing, shelter, sanitation, water, and that all comes from some sort of manual production. And I think that was what I find beautiful in Gandhi's teaching, because there was this notion, wow, if you're going to be sustained as a physical being, can you give in a way that's physical as well, that helps? And, you know, and just a note on the psychological side of that, you know, these days, young people, you know, children and adolescents are spending so much time in the virtual world behind the screen. And I think a lot of people are really concerned about that they're not learning to work with their hands at things. And there's a modern philosopher, Matthew Crawford, who's associated with the University of Virginia, but he has these books on like shop classes, soul craft, and he gives these really amazing arguments, really fascinating arguments about and evidence for why working with your hands actually develops the intelligence. You know, you can learn if you're just weaving arguments in a political or legal sense. It's a very slippery thing. You can always find a way to rationalize and weave your way out. But if you wire a electrical panel wrong, there's no way to explain that wrongly. The power won't work. And therefore, you know, plumbers and electricians and perhaps drapery installers, there are laws, things that you cannot argue with. They are objectively solid. And he thought that teaches a kind of morality. It teaches a kind of integrity that the slippery virtual world doesn't teach.
Well,
Thanks very much.
thank you, Joe, very much for being for giving us such a rich and fertile feast of ideas, and also for being such a wonderful conversationalist and kind of bantering it about with all of us. So it was very instructive, and thank you all for your comments. What a wonderful day, and what a wonderful way to kind of prepare ourselves for this Labor Day weekend, instead of it just being another 3 days or something. So thank you all very much for coming. Next week, we have the very mysterious and enigmatic, profound teaching about Ganesh that Robert and Vijay will help us with in a week from now. So you all have a wonderful week. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Joe.